On today's episode, we've got a collaboration with Locked On Canadiens regarding the Montreal Canadiens defensive prospects, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakesh, joined by Sebastian High. We're co-hosts here at Locked On NHL Prospects. And on today's episode, we'll be breaking down some of the Habs defensive prospects, Lane Hutson, David Reinbacher, and Adam Engström. We hopped on Locked On Canadiens with Laura Saba for a crossover episode, and we've got a lot of content regarding that to come your way. Before we splice that in, just make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. Before we go any further and plug in our discussion with Laura Saba at our crossover episode, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon today to get started.
So I'm here with Sebastian High and Hadi Kalakesh of Locked On NHL Prospects, which you should really be listening to. Whether or not they're talking about Habs prospects, they know everything about everything. So really, you should be checking out their podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, Hadi and Sebastian, to talk about, specifically today, we're going to be talking about Habs prospects.
Sure, that's our area of expertise. So let's get right into it.
It's going to be fun.
Let's go. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is Lane Hutson, because you know, we were hyped. Sebastian, you were with us from the beginning. We were hyped about this short king. And, you know, all he did this year was build upon that hype. He had a really successful year in the NCAA. So I want to talk a little bit about just how far he came within the span of 1 year and what we think his next step is going to be. Now, I think that it's going to be a little bit more time in the NCAA, but I would love your thoughts. Like, how have you seen his progression this year?
It's been awesome. He progressed more than I expected him to, and I had him ranked 11th overall. So he had a tremendous season, and I don't think anybody except maybe himself and his family expected him to be as good as he was immediately. Like I was expecting maybe a first couple months of him testing the water in the NCAA and getting used to the style of play, which is just completely different from the USHL. But he just thrived immediately, and that despite the fact that my biggest concerns in his draft year were his pivots, and they didn't progress too much in his D+1. And despite that, he came such a long way. He became a far more, I think, controlled offensive player. Of now, it's controlled chaos, whereas in the past it was perhaps a bit more
chaos.
Yeah, and spontaneous, and he adapted. It was kind of improvised often, despite his intelligence. But and he can do that because he processes the game so damn quickly that he can improvise and do just fine. But he added an element of control, and he started attacking the middle a lot more effectively and consistently. His shooting habits became incredible, and he's worked on his shot a lot as well. Like he's become a true dual threat from the blue line, which is rare for a D+1. So Lane Hutson progressed really well, and I enjoyed every second of it.
Yeah, fully agreed. I mean, there's also the element of, we didn't see much progression in his, like Sebastian mentioned, his pivots, his skating abilities in general. But I feel like he got a lot more intelligent and composed defensively. He's not kind of jumping the gun every chance that he gets. He's still getting beat wide just because his skating can't keep up with his brain. But in situations where he doesn't need to go at full speed, where he has the time to react, to think about what the next opposing move will be, he's gotten a lot better at anticipating moves, at getting into lanes preemptively and kind of stopping chances from occurring before they kind of materialize. So that's one thing I've seen as an improvement in Hutson's game. But yeah, the controlled element is both more present in his offensive game and more present in his defensive game, which is what you want out of Hutson at this level. I mean, he still has ways to go. I think at minimum a full year in the NCAA next year would benefit him. Maybe one more just to iron out his skating deficiencies and his defensive game even more. But I mean, you're talking about a guy who didn't need to improve his offensive game and still did. So it's amazing. And when's the last time a defenseman led his conference in scoring in his freshman year? I mean, that's just absurd. It's just ridiculous.
It's dumb. And just to add one last thing, I think I'm of the mind of one more year in the NCAA for Hutson and then 1 year in Laval. I think having a more linear progression in terms of levels would be really good for him in terms of not going NCAA to NHL. I think 1 year in the AHL would do him a ton of good. But I'm curious to see what the Habs do with that, because even this current regime has shown a tendency to get players from wherever they're at and immediately stick them into the NHL. And I don't think that would be the best strategy for Lane Hutson.
So I do want to, just before we move on to another prospect, talk a little bit about that aspect of it, because I think one of the things with Canadiens fans is that when we see talent, we get impatient. I think it's like that with every fan base, but in Montreal, I think we're so starved for, a good, reliably strong contending team year in and year out, that when we see somebody who has this kind of upside, and we see Hadi, like every single week you would have something about a new record he broke or a new thing he did, or how many points he had per night. Like I literally would remember that, and on Sundays when we would start to record, I would go back and look at your Twitter feed to see like what you had said about Lane Hutson, in case I missed any of his games, or in case, because like obviously he is one of my favorite prospects, so I kept a little bit more of a closer eye. But my question is, so I think patience needs to be the name of the game with players like this, because the talent is there, and we know the talent is there, but it needs to be translatable to a professional league, which is so important. And I think a lot of people are still concerned about his size. I'm not necessarily concerned about his size. I would say, what aspects of his, like the fine tuning, what aspects of his game needs some more fine tuning? I mean, you both mentioned probably at least another year in the NCAA. I do think, though, that if he has a full year and there's a chance to bring him to Laval, like the Habs will probably take that opportunity. I think we'll learn a lot this year about what they do with who they put in Laval and who they don't. So what kind of what kind of aspects of his game do you think require a little bit finer tuning before he can move to a professional league with potentially bigger bodies, a little bit more bruising, a little bit more, a little bit more professional? Like in the NHL, he's going to be playing with the top players, right?
Yeah, hopefully. And the thing is with Hutson is that everything mental in his game, he's got down pat. I don't think there's much to kind of develop there. It's just his feet don't keep up with his brain, and that's a big concern right now. For a smaller guy, you need to be able to evade pressure. You need to be able to keep up with wingers when they're barreling down the sides of the ice. I mean, if you put him up against Josh Anderson in a 1v1 rush defending scenario, he's losing every time. It's just, he needs to work on that pivoting game. And, as soon as he faces someone big enough or fast enough or strong enough with a decent enough reach off the rush, he gets beat fairly easily. And we saw that at the World Juniors and at the International World Championships, which was, that was kind of his introduction to playing against men, against professionals, against guys who, have a chance in the NHL. And you saw a difference. I mean, he scored a fantastic goal, probably the best goal we saw in the tournament. But then defensively in that same game was getting beat regularly. So it's just, how much do you mitigate that risk, and how high can he play in the lineup really depends on improving his skating, improving his pivoting, and just improving overall his ability to keep up with players off the rush. That's his biggest, I think, area of weakness that needs fine tuning. And I think as soon as you work on making him more explosive out of pivots, making him access his outside edges a bit better, you're getting a player who's going to be able to keep up mentally with the game, because he already does. You just need to get that physical aspect up, not in terms of strength, because I don't think Hudson's ever going to bully a 6'3" winger. It's just not his game. But he's able to play between checks. He's able to find options under pressure a lot better than he did last year as well. For me, it's just mainly off the rush, because in his own zone, when he's recovering a puck, he's able to absorb a hit, absorb pressure, and play through it. It's just off the rush is the biggest concern. And as a defenseman who's so offensively inclined, as daring as he is, he's going to be facing a lot of rush scenarios. So the more you mitigate that risk, the better Hutson will be, and the higher the chance of him becoming a true top pair defenseman.
I want to preempt something real quick. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, because we could talk about this for hours. I want to preempt the whole size argument with Lane Hutson. I think one of the things is that people say, like, oh, the reason that he can't do that is because he's not big enough. But I want to go back to what you're talking about, like he's never going to bully a 6'3" winger. that's okay if you have other guys, right? Like, it's not about, like, people are always like, enough with these small players. I think it's all about balance. Like, you do need a bigger bruising guy. And for me, I don't care about size as much as, I care about talent. So if you're going to get a big guy, don't just get a guy that's just large, right? Or heavy or plays heavy. That person needs to have skill. And I think if you have a balance up and down your lineup of that, it's okay for Lane Hutson not to be able to do that, right? Like, his strength is somewhere else. It's not there. And you have to, if you're managing a team, if you're constructing a roster, you have to play to each other's strengths and sort of make sure that you have balance up and down your lineup. Because I get so sick of being like, the Canadiens only pick small players. That is absolutely not true. That is definitely not something that's going on. But also that you only need big players to win. I think you absolutely need skill. And I think that should be where you start, and then you build in the size wherever possible. I think that's just my point of view. It's just because I'm like imagining everybody complaining about his size, and I'm like, that's not what he's here for. He's not here to be big. He's here to be talented. He's here to create offense. He's here to kind of, he's here to help the transition game. He's here to get the puck out of the zone. He's here to create chances. I think that's the most important thing with Lane Hutson.
For sure. I mean, look, if you're looking back at the Kotkaniemi draft, how many Habs fans right now would be saying that they'd rather have the big Finnish centerman instead of the small American defenseman in Quinn Hughes? Not many.
Yeah. Exactly.
But before we continue with our episode with Laura Saba from Locked On Canadiens, let me talk to you about our sponsors at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your original betting amount, up to $200 in free bonus bets. That's right. For just $20, you can get up to $200 in bonus bets for free, which you can use on anything from money line to over and unders to even who you think is going to swing the first home run of a game. All on an app that's safe, secure, easy to use, and best of all, you get your winnings instantly. There's no better place to bet MLB than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in free bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
Right. So like you kind of have to have balance. But speaking of balance, the Canadiens this year did kind of go in a different direction with all of their draft picks. I did want to focus a little bit on David Reinbacher because I think that some of the positivity and upside in his game has been lost in sort of the collective fan disappointment or underwhelm with the draft. So I wanted to like really have a conversation about David Reinbacher and talk about what does he bring to the game? Like, what are we excited about with David Reinbacher?
My comp for him all season long was Caden Gooley, and I kind of stick by that. There are definitely differences. Gooley, as a draft eligible, was definitely more violent than Reinbacher is. Not to say that Reinbacher doesn't play with physicality. He does. It's just Gooley will explode people in hits, right? And that's not really Reinbacher's game. He doesn't really chase hits very much, which Gooley doesn't do too much, but less so. The one key difference that I see between the two is that on the one hand, I think Reinbacher is a little bit more refined than Gooley was in his draft year. And on the other hand, where Gooley was a strong handler and carrier, but a bad passer, Reinbacher is the opposite. He is a very strong passer, and his handling skill is very limiting. He kind of has a locked top hand with his elbow over his shoulder, is kind of an awkward stance, and that limits his range of motion a lot. So when he's kind of circling around the offensive zone or trying to go through the neutral zone, carry the puck up himself, he's really only relying on his feet and his physicality to protect the puck and to evade. There's very, very little like deception in his rushes, and I think that's something that he'll need to work on. That said, this is a really intelligent defensive player, very, very, very good both in zone and in defending the rush. He plays extremely well in a professional system in the Swiss Hockey League. I think his defensive game is among the most refined of the entire 2023 draft class. That said, in the offensive zone, I think he's more limited than the point totals might suggest. Like, we've seen NHLE models like adore him for his production in a professional league. I'm a little bit more skeptical on that based on how he produced. A lot of it was secondary assists, shots from the point that were deflected. His big flashes of offense were often him like circling around the offensive zone and like where the ice surface is bigger in Europe. And he just kind of goes around once or twice in a circle and doesn't prod any holes in that compact defensive structure, just kind of goes around and then passes off to a teammate still on the perimeter. So I think he needs to really integrate some elements of deception and, for instance, like maybe using some stutter steps in those circles, trying to poke holes, and rather than just going single speed in a little circle. But those are things that he can develop. I think with the Habs development team, there's definitely hope that he can really build on his offensive game. But I think as of right now, it's a little bit limited. But yeah, I think he's an excellent player, and the Habs are lucky to add him to their prospect pool. I don't quite think it was the highest value selection at 5, which I think a lot of Habs fans also feel. But that said, this is going to be a top 4 piece for the next 2 decades for the Habs. I think he fits systemically really, really well. Like, he's going to be a great fit with Martin St. Louis. And he won't have the offensive burden either. Like Lane Hutson can be the first power play quarterback. Yep. You don't need Reinbacher to be that player, and that's okay. He can thrive in a different role. He's going to be a tremendous 5-on-5 defenseman, and probably a really solid PK one as well. So you're getting a really good player, but perhaps a little bit more subtly good than you would expect to get at 5th overall.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add regarding NHLE is I like NHLE models in kind of a rudimentary aspect of, in late rounds, sure, bet on the guy with the top 20 NHLE. You never know. But for me, it's just the thing with NHLE that isn't considered is how certain, league structures benefit certain play styles and skill sets. And that's definitely the case for Reinbacher, where he was able to put up all those points because a lot of the structures in the Swiss National League are collapsing structures defensively. So you'll see a lot of protecting the slot, a lot of 5-man within the high slot type scenarios. And that benefits Reinbacher's game greatly because he's a poor handler. So he's never going to he doesn't have to go to this high slot because it's always clogged up. So all he needs to do is use his strong skating, his physical reach in order to circle the ice, like Sebastian said. So that's kind of the one limiting aspect of NHLE is that it often purely looks at point production, sometimes size, sometimes handedness within a certain league to kind of equivocate that to what it would be in the NHL. But it severely understates the aspect of why does this player succeed in that league as well. Would that player succeed in the SHL or the KHL or that kind of thing? It doesn't take that into consideration. All it does is equivocate the points using an equation, which has its benefits. Like I said, when you're drafting in the mid to late rounds, you're looking for those gems. Always bet on the guys that are able to produce more than their age group, for sure. But to look at a guy at 5th overall to go, yeah, his NHLE's high and kind of limited to that, it's just there's a lot more that goes into it, and that's the scouting aspect.
Especially when there was a player with an even better NHLE left on the board.
Are we talking about Zach Benson or Matvei Michkov? Because both
either or.
Yeah.
So, I honestly, for me, Zach Benson was the one where I was like really fixated on, and I was disappointed. I want to stay on David Reinbacher for just one more moment, because he did sign his entry-level deal, obviously, this summer, which in my mind gives the Canadiens a lot more control over his development. So if you're the Canadiens and you're the skills coach and you're kind of any of the development team, like what kinds of things are you having David Reinbacher work on over the next couple of years?
Oh, small ice scenarios for sure with the puck. Just evading pressure quickly, getting on his backhand, and just cutting across opponents' hands in order to get out of small ice scenarios would be his big weakness, because he hasn't faced many of those scenarios in the Swiss National League. The even the forechecking pressure is completely different than what he's going to be facing in North America. There's at most one guy who's pressuring you, and he's even pressuring you very lightly, usually in the Swiss National League. Whereas in the AHL, in the NHL, you often see 2-1-2s on the forecheck. You often see kind of scenarios where you try to evade one guy, the second guy's on your back, that kind of thing. He's gonna have to work on those. So definitely, on puck scenarios where he's having to recover pucks off the boards, get off of them quickly, get on his backhand and cut across pressure rather than trying to just poke pucks up the boards, that kind of thing would very, very benefit his game.
Yeah, his off puck game is very, very strong. It's one of the stronger ones in the entire 2023 draft class. So as Hadi said, like, it is the on puck game, and I think I would build on like same type of thing, but specifically the handling. I think he really needs to loosen up that top hand. He needs to, I think, just stick him with Marie-Philippe Poulin for a couple months and work on the handling and work on the puck protection, the small area game, which is one of her greatest strengths. I think that would be great. That'd be one of my big focuses. Obviously, keep trying to develop his strengths further. I think if he's going to be a top pairing player in the NHL, it's if you double down on his current strengths. Like, you're not going to get into a top pairing role by trying to make him an offensive wizard. Like, it's not going to happen. That's totally fine. But I would keep trying to develop the defense, keep developing the physicality, keep developing everything that he's good at. Because I think you need to get those to the level of being separating skills in order to unlock that top pairing potential too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One last little thing I'd say is just the kind of recovering rims off the boards in the offensive zone would be one thing. It'll really help his handling to be able to face those scenarios more often where he's collecting pucks off the boards in the offensive zone. Basically, you rim the puck around the offensive zone, have him on the right side of the offensive blue line, recovers the puck, has to go to his backhand. Basically, you give him a forechecker that's pressuring him up the board so that he has to go to the inside. It'll develop small habits that are really good because off the puck, even offensively, he's really good. His ability to read when to pinch, when to hit the offensive zone, when to hit those pockets is really good, and that's going to pair really well with Lane Hutson. But it is essential to me that he learns to do the work that Hutson does on the puck in the offensive zone. That'll be really good for his game.
I want to turn our attention to another positive aspect of the Canadiens is Adam Engström. So when he was drafted, obviously there wasn't a whole lot of information that Habs fans were familiar with. Like, Adam Engström was not somebody that we were closely studying or following. I think part of it has to do with we didn't know how this new organization front office would draft, like what their philosophy was. And I think over the course of the last year, I think what he's done is kind of, in my mind, whether it was progress this year or it's something that he had all along that we weren't noticing, is that he is so much more promising than what we thought, and also so much more promising than where he was drafted. I think that's also really key. So I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about your thoughts, and let's say you're not super familiar with Adam Engström. Why should Canadiens fans be hype about him?
Yeah, so I've watched a whole lot of Engström, and especially last year. And what I've always come across, and what a lot of his coaches were saying, was he needs to learn to play poker. Basically when to fold, when to go all in, especially defensively. He would often go all in. He would often pressure guys really hard and kind of get left on the back foot heading into his own zone, that kind of thing. He's very good in transition. He's got a great first pass, fantastic hands. He's able to get out of pressure really well. Some of the things that we were talking with Reinbacher that are kind of missing, he has down pat. But the defensive game, like I said, playing poker, learning how to read the game and when to kind of get involved defensively, when to hold back, when to hold the blue line, that kind of thing, is really going to help his game. And I feel like that's come a long way. Watching him in this training camp, I felt like he was a lot closer to the NHL than he was previously, that was my main concern is with Engström. I saw kind of a longer path to the NHL where it would take him 3-4 years. Now I'm talking maybe a year or two before, I feel like he's NHL ready in terms of development. So the progression in his defensive game, the progression in his activation and his kind of composure defensively has gone a long way. So I'm really, really impressed with Engström.
Yeah, I've gone back and actually watched some draft year footage with the context of the D+1 year, because I remember watching him like while scouting the 2022 class, and I was always like, he was okay. Like he was often quite passive on the ice, and I think the big difference, as Hadi kind of alluded to, is that as a D+1, he started going all in every single time. And in his draft year, he was way too passive. So in my mind, it was kind of an overcorrection, like for the offense, which you kind of want to see as a D+1. Like I'd rather see a player try to overcorrect and then have to like recalibrate, because it means that they have that range. And once you have that range, I think it's a bit easier to try to fall somewhere in the middle where you find a bit of a more effective style. But yeah, he was incredible in my viewings. The D+1. He was one of the best U21 defensemen in Sweden for sure, and he was doing that as a 19-year-old who was a third-round draft pick. It was really impressive. He's extremely mobile. He flashes really impressive skill. He's not like Lane Hutson in terms of taking over shifts in the offensive zone, but he makes really good, subtle offensive plays, and he will be aggressive offensively. I think right now my projection would be an offensive player on a second pairing. I think that is quite a reasonable one. I haven't quite seen the top pairing upside in terms of like the raw skill, like even in his most aggressive all-in moments, it's not an overwhelming skill, even against junior competition. So I think if fans are starting to get hyped in terms of like he is our future top pairing guy, I would pump the brakes a little bit, but I think he's excellent, and I don't think he's getting quite enough focus by the collective Habs fan base, though I have seen some individual people go be very optimistic on his potential too.
And I think part of it is also just because of where he was drafted, right? Like everybody has a tendency to just kind of look at the top players or the ones in North America, just kind of, as we get more news about the QMJHL players,
more highlights
OHL
too.
players. Yeah, like this, it's more available to us. What I'm hearing a little bit is that these are aspects of his game that he can improve by playing a maximum number of minutes against the best competition, essentially, right?
Yeah,
and he will be doing that this year. He's going to be a first pairing defenseman in the SHL as a D+2, and it's going to be nuts. Like he's in a great system. Regula is probably the best development program in all of Europe. Probably, yeah. Like it's a tremendous place for him to marinate. I'd probably give him 2 more years there, just because it's such an awesome role. I would rather not like try to tear him out of that in a year's time. Like I'd rather give him 2 years as a top pairing guy in Sweden, on a good young team, and like the doors kind of opened up for him. Like you have like William Wallinder, who's off to the AHL, which really opens up that top pairing left shot defenseman role. And he kind of had his and Willander as a right shot is also gone. But I think that the playoffs were really kind of like his coming out party as a true high-end SHL defenseman. Like you had interviews of the coaches, of the head coach that he was playing against in the middle of the series, saying like, yeah, this guy's ridiculous. Like I've had to like adapt my systems to deal with him. Like he's really skilled.
The opposing coach straight up said that he had no solution to Adam Engström.
Which is and this is in the SHL playoffs, and this is a 19-year-old kid. So his progression has been really, really impressive. I'm very curious to see how he starts the season in that big role, because last year was kind of the year where he elevated himself to that level. I'm curious what happens when he's kind of handed the keys to that defensive core as a 19-year-old. So it's going to be a very exciting season for Adam Engström, and I'm quite hopeful for his NHL upside.
All right, so that was Laura Saba with myself and Sebastian High here at the Locked On collab, the crossover episode with Locked On Canadiens. If you liked what you've been listening to, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to leave us a comment as well, letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform. We'll also be linking Locked On Canadiens content and where to find them down below in the description. So just make sure to check that out. Now for your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about the daily occurrences in the sports world. And for our next episode, make sure to tune in. We'll have a bit more discussions with Laura Saba, but more specifically regarding the 2024 NHL draft. Just an early look at some of the interesting storylines from that draft coming up. So this has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian High, and I hope you tune in next time.